our first speaker, we're happy to have Pat Barkey, who has been with us. Pat tells me 11 years he's been over at the university. We reminded back in 08 and 09, he and Terry Johnson, who you know here, and Terry's been relegated to running the PowerPoint. What a fall for you, Terry. But anyway, he was the man that had all the answers. And so back in 09, when things weren't going so well, I referred to both of these guys. One is Dr. Boo, and the other is Dr. Boo. Things improved, and Pat would like to be referred to now as Mr. Sunshine. So that will set up for his talk. Pat came from Ball State University 11 years ago and heads up the Bureau, and he has completed a number of studies and is the person to talk to about the outlook for Montana. So without further ado, I introduce Pat Barkey.
Good afternoon. This is historically the worst possible time to teach a class. My career as a professor is right after lunch, as you digest. So let's digest a few things about the state economy, because the first thing I want to do is give you the this is a commercial, this is public radio, this is commercial radio. The ad for the real outlook will be revealed at our annual program, which this year is the 44th annual Economic Outlook Program. We kick off here in Helena on January 29th. Our theme this year is affordable housing, facing the challenge in affordable housing. We have a half-day program. We've been doing it a long time. I've been involved with it, Paul Colson before me, although he's still on the program. So look forward to seeing you there. And that's where I'll really give you the outlook. Today you get the teaser, but today you get the logic and you get the thinking. I think this is going to hold up pretty much. And I think the question being asked right now, I believe, is the faster growth that's clearly happening in the U.S. economy showing up here? We're supposed to be the scorekeepers. What do we see? Well, what we see is a bunch of partial data. So the reality of our business is it takes us a while to figure out what's going on in the state economy. But we certainly see some good indicators that 18 has seen at least continued growth. Not sure about faster growth, but certainly it's been a growth year for the state economy. One of the things that we do know about, because we have pretty current data, not just the data, but we have the anecdotes, and that is the labor market, as we heard the Lieutenant Governor talk about at lunch, the labor market continues to be very, very tight, very, very hot, very, very troublesome for employers. And all those things have gotten more pronounced in this year. I think one of the indicators that we also have, and this is a different kind of indicator in this town, state revenues in this town are about how much money do we have to play with. For us as economists, I don't worry about how much money we spend and where we spend it so much, as I worry about where the economy is right now. And of course, as people are making tax payments based on their level of activity, for all the different things we tax, that gives me feedback, imperfect, but good feedback from a time point of view on how the economy's doing. And as I think you'll hear in a little bit, the state revenue is off to a pretty good start in this fiscal year. And there's the but, right? There's some things we should not be losing sight of. One of the things, very broadly speaking, is the fact that the global economic environment today is decidedly worse than it was a year ago. There's really not much better about what's going on globally. And yes, tariffs are part of this, but a big part of this is just a slowdown in the major trading partners. Even the Chinese are starting to slow down. And we've certainly seen a lot of slowdown in Europe and in Japan and some of the places where we in Montana sell our products, both by shipping them over there, and also when they ship their people over here, they walk around our parks. And that's tourism, and that's an export from our point of view, just like any other activity. I think we also are in a regime where we can clearly see higher interest rates are taking a bite. They're taking a bite out of construction markets. They're taking a bite out of the investment, the affordability of homes, which again is something we're going to look at very closely in our program. And they're taking a bite out of some business decisions. It's something that's starting to move up significantly. Of course, the interest rate picture is made even more cloudy by the fact that today, if the short-term interest rates are going up, long-term interest rates, if anything, are starting to go down. And those of you who have been through a few recessions know that this so-called inverted relationship, when long-term rates fall relative to short-term rates, in fact, when they're even exceeded by short-term rates, this inverted yield curve is considered to be, for very good reasons, a big canary in the coal mine, so to speak, that we should be worried about because that canary is not looking too good right now. I think the recovery for some important industries here has been there. You can see it in agriculture and energy, but it's not been particularly smooth. And I also want to ask the question, before we get too excited about the future, maybe somebody should tell us what the heck happened in 2016 in the Montana economy, because the engine didn't start that morning. And it's running now, but we're really not sure how well it's going to run in the future when we had such a surprisingly bad performance. So first, the obvious story here is the U.S. economy has had a pretty good year. The last 2 quarters of growth, as our maximum leader likes to say, he's let everyone know about these numbers often before they're even publicly announced, which is a bit of an issue. But 4%, 3% growth, you can see that this is clearly an order of magnitude higher than we've seen before. In terms of the forecast, this forecast is made by IHS Markit. Their forecast is pretty restrained, says we're just going to go back to the same old growth we've seen before. But that's clearly a different kind of situation than we've had in the past. And so the question is, well, what about Montana? What do we know about Montana? Well, this is what we know about Montana. It's a different kind of graph. It's a shorter graph. It looks at non-farm earnings going back to 2012. This is the growth in the size of the economy corrected for inflation, as we like to measure here in our shop. And it goes up and down, and you can see, by the way, the last year is 17. I don't have 18 yet. I never do. We're always driving our car forward, looking in the rearview mirror to see where we are. That's the nature of economic forecasting at the state and local level. And you can see 2017, boy, that was good growth, but what the heck happened in 2016? As I said, that was the morning we got into the car and turned the key, and it didn't start. And it's running today. We hope it runs tomorrow, but maybe we ought to look a little more closely at what happened in 16 to try to understand what it tells us, especially as we're trying to forecast what's going to happen in 19. So let me look at that a little bit more closely. So if you go back to 16 and you look at these big industry categories, there's 2 that are completely blotted out. I'll try to help you with what those are. So this is taking all the 23 different industries at this level of aggregation, boiling them down to just these 7 categories, 8 categories you can see. You can see that the big stories, these last 2 bars, second to last bar, anybody, I guess you can't see it on a few of these screens, that's mining. That's mining, which includes oil production. By the way, that's not percent. Those are millions of dollars. So that in a single year, mining earnings declined by almost $250 million. So they're pretty significant to begin with. But they went into reverse pretty seriously in 2016. And the last one is other. Other is the one I had to create to make up the lines of this graph. That was largely transportation, warehousing. That was the physical goods movement, storage, and distribution industries. And a lot of that was the buildings. All right? Now that offset, look at, there's some gains. There's some good stories there. There's a good story there in healthcare, some story there in government, and you can see some growth in some of the other sectors. But there's some pretty big negatives there. If you flip that ahead to 17, this is that big difference. Now the engine is running. So in 17, which is the most recent year we have, this is the good news. This is Mr. Sunshine. I'm coming out. I'm smiling, right? The lights are on. I can see the end of the road, etc. And you can see that it's just a completely different story. In fact, this is a rather impressive performance. First off, if you go all the way over there to the right, second to the right, mining switched from a loss of $250 million to a gain of $100 million. That's a huge swing. So clearly that was a big wild card, trying to understand why the Montana economy flickered in 2016 and took state revenue growth down with it, by the way, had to do a lot with that turnaround. But of course, you can see there's been pretty impressive gains, construction, manufacturing, retail and wholesale trade. Those were tiny little bars before. And we're really seeing a pretty impressive growth in something I'm calling finance and business services. That's everything from banking to insurance to professional services. That's where a lot of tech activity is. It's in that category. All those things all added to the economy. In fact, there's no negative bars on this entire graph. So it's a story. I can't explain all of it. I can explain mining a little bit. I'm not sure I can explain all of these that well. But you'll notice what a big change that was and how humbling that is. Now when you're going to go forward, are you going to say this is going to continue? Or are you going to say this is coming back? I think I lean more towards this, but you have to have some appreciation for how different the story has been. One different way of playing over the same picture is to look at it through a different lens, and that's to look around the state. And I apologize, these county names that came up better on my computer screen, they're not showing up too well. I've got a collection of county, Cascade, Custer, the ones you can't read there, slightly negative. The story here was 2016 was a down year for the overall state, even though Western Montana did really well. Even though Gallatin, no one noticed. Even though Missoula, nobody really noticed. And Flathead, people didn't really notice. There was still pretty good growth there. But look at those negatives off on the right. What are those? Well, that one there that's almost the second largest is Richland County. And again, these are not percents, these are dollars. All right? So Richland County shrank by more than $100 million in terms of earnings in 2016. Of course, that's the oil, but ag helped there as well on the negative side. The rest are Silverbow, Yellowstone, and the final bar is the rest of the state. So that's ag, that's mining, that's a tough ride, but it didn't really start until you got roughly to Billings on the highway going east. And it's really, you can see what a difference this is, and how someone in Western Montana might not have even noticed or even appreciated how tough it was getting in the eastern part of the state. Again, we flipped to 17, and the story largely turns around. Even Richland, that negative number is only negative 20-ish something now, from negative 100, that's better. But you can see these big gains across the state, and look at that turnabout in Billings. State's largest economy went from a fairly sizable negative earnings growth to something positive. So this is something a little unsettling. It would be more unsettling if we were going the opposite direction. But it's a good news story, but there's a little concern over what this really means. Now, we dug into this a little bit more and said, well, why are these counties doing so well in 17? And this is I always have an experimental slide for this group, right? Because you're kind of my guinea pigs, right? I test my stuff out here. And Paul Polson thought this was a little wonky, but I thought if I explained this, maybe you'd see my point. So when you look at the economic statistics, there's something called earnings. And earnings is composed of wages and salaries, which are what people get in paychecks. It's about 2/3 earnings, or less than that. There's something called other labor income, which is largely benefits. And the third is something called proprietor income, which is the earnings of business owners who take their pass-through income to business owners, unincorporated. So wages and salaries, keep that in mind, about 65% of the totals. So the growth in earnings, about 65% of that should be explained by growth in wages and salaries. Well, here's a little look around the state. If you look at that state total at the bottom, Montana, it's about 62%. So about 62% of Montana earnings growth is explainable by wage and salaries. That's about in the range of ballpark. But look at some of these differences, in particular, look at Yellowstone. Yellowstone's about less than 40% is explained by wage and salary. So what that meant is that big swing in Yellowstone County I was showing you before, when we had a sharp negative turned into a sharp positive, was mostly business owners. That was the swing. And in fact, it's mostly business owners, it turns out, in mining industries. And it's really the pickup, not just mining, transportation as well, but it's really the pickup in energy, not obviously in Yellowstone County, but Yellowstone County serves the energy patch in 4 different states. That was a big swing player. And it's also highly volatile. So it swings around. That caused me some concern. Probably the poster child for volatility would be Silverbow. 2% of the gains in Silverbow County in 2017 were wage and salary workers. The rest of it was business proprietor income. So that's really out there in terms of being high, so to speak. But you can see the rest of them are somewhere in between. Why don't we talk about farming? I haven't talked about farming yet. I haven't talked about ag. And we wave our hands from time to time. I thought I'd give you a little glimmer about what some of the ag statistics look like on the same metrics I've just been talking about. So looking at farm earnings, this is the behavior of farm earnings in terms of growth since 2010. You can see there's quite a bit of volatility in it. You can also see that there's some fairly good ag years that have some fairly negative farm earnings. And a lot of times what we've observed over our careers is that on the farming side, we think gross receipts are really a better measure of the health of Montana farmers and ranchers, because it happens that when farmers have a good revenue year, that's when they buy new stuff. And so income tends not to be a very good indicator. But having said that, here's where farm earnings have been the last 2 years in terms of change, and there's been a fair amount of pain. On the ag side, the good news is that we bounced back to a decent production year in 2017. The bad news, of course, is that prices have not always been well behaved. In fact, they continue to be weak for some important commodities, and it's looking like another year of financial stress for Montana ag producers. That clearly shows up in some of the growth statistics I was sharing with you. Let's talk about some of these statistics. Let's push this conversation now forward into 2018. And it looks like my label got chopped off here a little bit. So what I'm trying to show you is the most recent data that I have on growth in the Montana economy. And it's a bit of a busy graph. So first off, what am I measuring? I'm measuring wages and salary, wage and salary growth up to the 2018 second quarter, so the end of June. That's where most of my real data stopped. Now, the problem with this is that wages and salaries, I just told you, they're only about 65% of earnings, and the other part has been moving around a lot. So there's a lot left to explain, but at least I have data on this. So what do I have? I have a collection of counties, 56 counties. The ones that are in the red are the ones that are growing over 2.5%, 2.6. Then the turquoise are the second category. If you're red or turquoise, you're growing. If you're those other two colors that I can't pronounce, one was olivish and one was greenish, those are not so good. Now, before we jump into where a couple of these counties are, I'll tell you that this is always a bit of a crapshoot. In any individual quarter, especially with smaller counties, things happen to make things bounce around. But I'll tell you a couple patterns here. First is that the fastest growing counties have slowed down a little bit in wages and salary. So you look at Missoula's in the red, 2.8%. In fact, Flathead 2.6, Bozeman 3.8. Those have been quite a bit higher in years past. So it's coming down from the 4s to 5s to more like the 3s and the 4s. I don't read too much into that. I've seen this kind of fluctuation happen before. The pattern remains the same, and that is Western Montana is doing pretty doggone well, and Eastern Montana not as well. The better story is that Eastern Montana is now coming back to having less growth instead of being negative growth. So you look at Cascade County, and for that matter, Lewis and Clark, where we are today. I don't have that here. A mild negative in Great Falls. That's largely ag-related. That could bounce back next quarter. It's a little bit volatile, but there's certainly a story which I don't think is going to be a complete news to those of you that are familiar with the area. Is that Cascade and Lewis and Clark definitely on a forward growth trajectory, and those heavy in-migration counties in the west that have such booming real estate and some other things going for them. Bounce around here, Richland, 0.4%. That's a great news story, Richland County. You could just about change that to -40. a couple years ago. I mean, it's really been an improvement over there. The fastest growing one on this map turns out to be Madison County, 15% wage and salary. Finally, Yellowstone, 1.2, which is a little different than that income data suggested, right? Because this isn't the whole story, but this is what I know. So looking at this, looking at 18, it looks like we've had continued growth, maybe a little bit slower pace growth. Let me just pull out a couple of these counties to give you a perspective on this. You know, there's 56 counties. I can't show you a graph for all of them. But I got to show you this graph because this is one of those gee whiz graphs. I mean, everything you put up on Gallatin County looks like this. This is total wages paid through the wage and salary workers. Doesn't include business proprietor income, as I said before. And that shows, you know, roughly since 2012 that Gallatin has grown about 42% in real terms, corrected for inflation. And meanwhile, Montana has grown something like 15%. So it's, you know, it's a good news story on both sides, but clearly there's a big story going on. I just picked out one other county because I thought it was rather remarkable. It shows you a little bit what's going on in the oil patch. I haven't talked about that. I'm not sure if I have time to or not. But, you know, it's been a tough road for the oil patch counties. You can see that Richland County was on an escalator going up, and then oil prices crashed at the end of 14, and it's been on an escalator down, and those are gigantic declines. And I feel for some of those people that invested a lot of money, continued based on the thought that kind of double-digit growth was going to continue. But that's the big news. I mean, the fact that that has flattened out and has turned to a small gain is big news for the Montana economy. I would argue it's big news for the legislature. It's certainly an important piece of information. What's happened there, of course, most of us know, is that until October, right, we saw a steady increase in the some of the indices of crude oil prices. And we've seen there's now been, since the earlier part of this year, there has been an increase in Montana oil production. It's not huge, but Montana oil production itself is not huge. But of course, I see Tom Richmond sitting here. He's the one that taught me that the only way you can have an increase in oil production is to be drilling new wells. So clearly that's happened. On the North Dakota side, it's much more impressive, and they've easily surpassed their peak before the oil price declined. But now, we've seen this big fall off, so that puts some of that in doubt. What else do we know about 2018? Well, labor markets, depending on whether you're looking for a job or you're looking to fill a position, are certainly getting tighter. The way I like to measure that, you heard Lieutenant Governor mention the unemployment rate at lunch. That's certainly a good measure of that. I like to look at these unemployment claims. If you look over 2014 to 2015, over the 12 months of the year, this whole graph shifts down. That means that the pool of workers, at least as measured by those collecting UI, is shrinking. But of course, as you march forward in time, you notice in 16 it didn't really shrink that much. That's consistent with the weaker growth. But 17, that pattern jumped in again. With good growth, this line shifted down. In 2018, this is why I like this data. I've got it right through October. It's administrative data, so it's never revised. It's actually a count. And look at that. It actually dipped below 4,000 in the month of September. That is the lowest I have ever seen that number, going back, I believe, to the late 70s. So that is, no matter how you slice it, the pool of workers looking for jobs is not what it used to be. All right. Now, I want to pause there for a second and just bring up a couple issues that have to do with the outlook and have to do with some of the issues that are talked about. And these are some aspects of those issues that I don't think are getting enough attention. The first has to do with the tight labor market. So the tight labor market, strong growing economy, everyone's looking for workers, etc. And that's true. It's hard to find workers. Everyone has told me that. The data support that. But part of this problem is perfectly predictable. And I want to show you why. It has to do with demographics. All right? The baby boomers are retiring. Their replacement, the ones that you need to replace them are not as numerous. We should know this. And in fact, I would argue the point of this graph I'm about to show you is that absent a recession, which of course we know is going to create slack in the labor market, and none of us like that solution. But we're going to see another recession, no question about it. It's a question of when. But you can expect to see tight labor markets for a long, long time. Let's take a look at that. First off, if you just look purely at population of Montana in these 5 age cohorts, and you look where we are in 2001, and then you look at where we stood in 2008, and you pay particular attention to the middle two, the 20 to 35, 36 to 65. And that's good news. 01 was a recession year. 08 was, right at the start, but that was the beginning of the end of a boom, shall we say. Good job growth, population growth, right along with it. Good. People complained about low unemployment rates in 2007. Maybe not so much in 08. But there was at least more people entering working age. What happened in 2016? Well, this has nothing to do with the economy. This is purely demographics. We could have forecast this in 01, and our forecast would be plus or minus 2%. It's a pretty good forecast. And you notice what happened in particular to that cohort 36 to 65. Nothing to do with this recession. It's just a body count. And you notice that, yeah, there's been growth between 08 and 2016, quite a bit of growth. But look at the available population, especially in that older cohort. And then flip over and look at 65 plus. So that's a story that tells us that the demographics is going to be hurting us for a while. It's not all the story. The hot economy certainly is part. But the demographic piece says, the policy's not going to make that go away unless we open the spigot, as we know, and let in a lot of people in the country, which maybe we should be doing. But that's clearly what we're doing right now. And in fact, if you look at a forecast of 26, it just gets worse, at least for the next 8 years or so, where we're going to see actually not just a plateauing, but a fall off in that age 36 to 65, and a continued acceleration 65 plus. So part of the solution to the labor shortage is managing this, and there's been a lot of management done already of that, but this is the setting in which that takes place. In fact, if you look at these same age cohorts for not the population, but the labor force, there has been a little bit of management done. So you can see the labor force participation of the 65 plus has gone up, and you can see that the declines in 36 to 65, not as bad as the rest of the data. I have one more slide. Do I have time for one more slide? Let me switch on. So I'm switching gears here a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about this idea of whether the Montana economy has changed. And in fact, are we seeing sort of a new source of growth in the Montana economy that's disconnected from employment? Is this unearned income? This idea that we're a state that attracts people. Those people bring their wealth with them. They make money from their wealth, from their property holdings, and so forth. And this is part of the new Montana economy that we should recognize in terms of how we treat the support of government. So what I've shown here is a graph. Okay, let's look at the fraction of total income of Montanans that is derived from 2 categories. This is so-called unearned income. The first category is a composite category: dividends, interest, rent, and royalties. All right? So that's pretty self-explanatory. The second is transfer income, which is largely distributions. The biggest piece of that is Social Security, but some other retirement transfers as well. And you can see this is the fraction. So way back there in 1958, it was 20%, and now it's over 40%. And that's a big deal. That's clearly a big change, and that's certainly a valid point. But the point I'm trying to make here is this is history. This pretty much played out by the mid-'80s. That's when this big run-up basically stopped. There has been some mild increase in the last 3 or 4 years, but really that increase is very similar to what's happening in the U.S. In fact, the only thing distinctive about Montana's unearned income is that it's been higher, and always has been a little higher, than the rest of the country. Part of that is because we're an older population, and part of that is because we have different levels of participation in some of the federal programs that are contributing to these transfers. Because the story here is not so much dividends, interest, and rent. Those have been, as a fraction of the total economy, those have been pretty constant. They've been about, I'm trying to think, somewhere around 18% of income from dividends, interest, and rent. Not exactly constant, but in that neighborhood. The big change has been transfer. So as people retired and collected Social Security, that's what happened between 58 and 85. That became a bigger fraction. But I guess my story here, I poured a little bit of cold water on this, maybe invite some debate. I probably have enough time for questions, but that's the story. So just to close, I think 2018 was a year when many bad things did not happen. So we didn't have a bad fire season. We didn't have a shutdown in Washington. We actually had a budget that was passed. We didn't have a drought. So that was good. I think we saw, I didn't talk too much about some of this, healthcare and tech-related expansions were definitely strong in 18. Real estate, commercial construction still doing pretty well. That's feeding the financial sector. Home building was underwhelming. We're just not building as many homes as we're forming households. You can see that in prices. Huge issues ahead. As we look at 19, tariffs could be extremely painful for Montana, particularly on the ag side, but not just the ag side. And then finally, what's the next recession going to look like? All right, there will be one. I'm not saying there'll be one next year, but there will be another recession. If it's another financial panic, that would be unprecedented. Those things happen every 80 years. But let's face it, we're forecasters. We're often wrong. All right, that's that's one of those once in a century hurricanes that happens 5 years in a row. The next recession, a financial recession like we saw before, that would be very bad. A tech bust like we had in 2001, that would be worse for Montana today than it was back then, but probably wouldn't be the job killer that the Great Recession was. So I went to a seminar on how to get presentations, and probably a little late. Maybe I should have thought of that before. But the tip was I shouldn't put up a slide that says you have any questions, because that slide merely shows that I'm either A, desperate, or B, polite. I don't know about either of those. But so I thought I would leave my slide here with things to think about as you ask the questions. So thank you very much. Who's got the first question?
We've got about 10 minutes, and so grill is.
Pat, what was the mine that was a big turnaround that shut down, and was it Colstrip or what was?
No, I'm not. I mean,
it dropped in 16 to negative.
Okay, that was mining earnings. All right, and mining earnings is composed of the production side, so it's the mining, and it's an unfortunate word, mining, because oil production and gas production are included there. So I was thinking that energy production. And then there's mining support services. And support services, I think, is the biggest category, because the production changes have not been that large. Most of the fluctuations in Montana oil and gas revenues come from changes in prices, not production. But the support services, particularly Billings, I did a presentation in Billings, and the earnings per job in mining support services in Yellowstone County is $170,000 a year. So, very good. Yeah.
Further questions for Pat? We'll get him again until you sign up for this.
This is free.
Giving you a free plug. Where's the next meeting?
January 29th, Great Northern.
Okay. Here it comes, Becky.
Okay. So what do you see as far as the tech industry coming into Montana and expanding? Is it more cottage industry, or is it more kind of corporate-based situation?
I hear the question. Tech industry, is it cottage-based industry, corporate-based? Right now it's everything. One thing it isn't is it's not in all parts of Montana. The Tech Alliance doesn't like to say that. I'd say they're all statewide, but it's really Bozeman, Missoula, and some other places. There certainly is a lot of startup activity. The big development in tech right now is twofold. One is that the venture funds are getting off the ground, and there are things getting funded right now, and that's encouraging. That's something that's not totally new, but it's newer in Montana. That's important. And the second thing is an old story that's happened in Montana a lot, and that is companies are getting bought, right? And we all worry a little bit about what happens when those companies get bought. There's some tech companies getting bought, and there's probably tech companies got bought in the communities you live in. And so far, that's been a good story. Those purchases of Montana companies by larger conglomerates, be it Oracle or whatever, have recognized the value of what's here and grown.
So follow-up to that, are you seeing a lot of these tech startup companies coming into communities that offer companion microbrew operations?
I love doing studies at brewers because we always have a meeting like a brewer. And we got this kickoff meeting. Well, let's meet at your office. Well, I like it. Microbrewer. I don't know how to answer that question other than I guess I just did answer it because I made it.
Well, we've got, for instance, we have a demographic
Right.
that's coming in to start the
Right.
tech, and the entrepreneurs that come in to start the brewery.
Right. Well, there's two ways to answer that. First off, I don't think microbrewers are per se high tech. All right. But clearly, high tech is there's a lifestyle portability, you can live wherever you want, kind of to that. And I think a lot of the attraction of tech in places like Missoula and Bozeman, college towns, beautiful vibe, et cetera, and microbreweries seem to go that. But having studied the microbrewery industry, it's everywhere. So, microbrewery is one in Nicolaka yet? One is
Okay, Pat, thanks very much. Oh, Amy, you got something real quick?
Well, I just was going to ask on that portability follow-up. That's something that we've heard a lot of from some different policymakers. Have you looked at that, Pat, and how that's impacting the Montana economy with people being able to do their job kind of anywhere?
We've tried to. Some people call it telecommuting. There's even a gig economy aspect to this because people who are doing their job from anywhere are often doing more than one job. And so they may be a consultant of some kind with a national clientele here. We've studied that off and on for about 10 or 15 years. It keeps changing before our eyes. Most of the times when you measure it, it's smaller than you think. That's all I'll say. But I think in this case, the measurements are always behind the curve. We're always measuring what was there in 2014. We haven't measured it lately, so it could be a lot more.
Okay, thank you. And on behalf of the Montana taxpayers, Pat, we want to thank you all.